Hi everyone, so I wanted to talk a little bit today about FilmStruck. For those of you who are not aware, FilmStruck is an online subscription-based streaming service very popular among film enthusiasts that streamed the entire Criterion collection of classic movies from a whole bunch of different eras and genres and countries, and it not only offered a place where you could watch hundreds and hundreds of films, including very rare ones that have not had any legitimate home releases, but also offered bonus features, commentaries, original bonus content like introductions presented by mainstream and indie filmmakers about the films, original featurettes about the making of the movies. It wasn't simply a streaming library, it was a curation of films. It wasn't just about the availability of these titles, it was about expressing an appreciation for them on the part of the site runners, and, creating content that sought to educate users about the films they presented and why they were important and demonstrate how they were influential. It also didn't have all this algorithm bullshit that like Netflix and Hulu and other major streaming services have, where they keep constantly trying to guess what you'll want to see based on tangential connections to shit you've already seen. FilmStruck's algorithms actively put new content in front of you. It could detect if you were on a roll with a certain kind of movie, but the site was always encouraging you to dig deeper into them and learn about them and discover new ones. Also, unlike Netflix, their divisions of genres and types of content actually made sense, and, that's because they were decided one by a real human staff and not an algorithm. To my knowledge, the site was only available in the United States and very briefly in the UK, but it had been growing and expanding, and I am now using the past tense because although it is scheduled to stay up until November 29th, they are no longer accepting new members, and the owner of the site, Warner Media, has announced that it's being shut down. FilmStruck was one of several other sort of niche media outfits that Warner Media, a subsidiary of the massive corporation Time Warner Cable, had been funding, along with stuff like Turner Classic Movies, which is a TV channel that airs classic movies as well as discussions and featurettes on them. Drama Fever, which was a video-on-demand service specializing in streaming Korean TV dramas, and Super Deluxe, which was a digital content and TV studio bolstered by the likes of Tim and Eric, which has made some pretty funny shit. The latter two of which were also shut down this month. And I've actually never been a FilmStruck user. I already have too many subscriptions that I pay for and rely on, and I don't really have that much money anyway, especially trying to pay for school and my home and see the pretty meager number of movies, honestly, that I see in theaters every year to review for this channel, so I never had my own account. But I've used the site, I've been aware of the site since the beginning, I know people who use and love the site. A film professor at my college was actually interviewed by the site recently, and you also don't have to have been a FilmStruck user, I think, to know that this is a pretty terrible thing for people who love movies, for people who love to find and watch new movies they haven't seen before, and, for people who like to learn about movies. While apparently there had been plans to kill FilmStruck at Warner Media eventually for a while, these shutdowns all came about after the recent acquisition of Time Warner by AT&T, and the announcement of Warner Media's hopes to launch their own streaming service for the content they own next year to compete with Disney's upcoming streaming service that they're launching to compete with Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, etc. On the theatrical side of things, in the entertainment industry, we have every studio trying to recreate the success of Disney and Marvel by making big-budget, tentpole action movies out of existing nostalgic properties, and creating complicated but ultimately unnecessary cinematic universes. And on the streaming side of things, we have every company trying to make their own $10 a month streaming service that will eventually become the only place other than on physical media, which is itself being less and less prioritized by distributors to legally consume all of their content. And not only is this probably too expensive for the average American media consumer to be sustainable, especially since the vast majority of, or I won't say the vast majority, but a good number of the people who primarily watch streaming content rather than broadcast content as young people who are the poorest generation of Americans at the moment. It also just absolutely sucks for anyone like me who does not like watching the same 10 things everywhere. Warner Media said in its announcement of their shutting down FilmStruck that while it has a vocal fan base, it is still a niche service, and that the company needs to consolidate their resources away from what they call subscale direct-to-consumer efforts in favor of funding one behemoth of all of the most popular content they own. I mean, yeah, it's not that unexpected that the fewer and fewer companies that own the majority of media and consumption outlets in the country, which is what has been happening, and the more those companies are driven by the demands for the most popular content and nothing else, which has been happening, that the majority of available content will become the most generic and repetitive. And that's not something I'm worried about just because I'm a film snob. I'm worried about it because I'm a person who doesn't like being fucking bored and actually likes having options for consuming new things. And it's not like Warner Media can just copy over FilmStruck's entire library of films because they don't own all of them. I mean, the distribution and exhibition rights to the majority of the movies on FilmStruck were negotiated personally by the site runners, and with the promise of those movies being exhibited in a way that respected and properly contextualized the work and encouraged and strengthened academic interest in films, both through the availability and through the presentation. Many of the movies in FilmStruck's library, again, not only did not come as a package deal with their bonus features, most of them have never had legitimate American home releases, so buying a copy or even renting a copy from your local library isn't an option. And even beyond that, buying physical media is more expensive, it takes up space, and there is a finite amount of copies that people can own because no one is making new ones, so it's not an option for everybody. FilmStruck made it an option for everybody that could pay $7 to $10 a month, and that is why it was a good thing. And to that you may say, well, why don't you just pirate the movies you want to watch if all the legal means are too expensive or impossible? And yes, at times if I need to watch a movie for a class or there are legitimately no inexpensive means of watching it, I have to resort to streaming it on a sketchy third-party site. I don't really torrent anymore, but the illegal streaming, yes. But for one thing, I don't like doing that because I generally like to at least pay for the opportunity to see content that I like, if not for each piece of content individually, especially if it's content that I want to signal to the lizard overlords who can only speak in money transactions that I want more of it. And for another thing, even if delivering it legitimately would be catering to a niche audience, illegal consumption of content is not something that exhibitors of content should create room for. FilmStruck was not pilfering money from Warner Media, I assure you, and its growth and passionate fan base came out of it specifically being a niche service. The internet is all about catering to niche services, and gigantic corporations like Time Warner definitely have the money to both cater to niche audiences and create their own giant generic movie streaming business ventures, which in Warner's case particularly I'm not even sure is a great idea given the competition. The problem is that modern media companies believe that once you determine that a majority of people want a few of the same general things, that means that everyone wants that thing, and that means that funding things other than those things is not worth it because it's not going toward the absolute maximum profit you can possibly get. Not only have the industry's predictors of what will make the most money time and again been proven to not exactly be correct, but it also takes away resources toward preserving and delivering any content that doesn't match those predictors, so it takes away anything that they don't believe will make the most money possible and then sells that falsely as a necessary component to this illusion of unlimited availability. Now, the movie snob part of me does come into play here, and I apologize in advance, but you may be wondering why anyone should care that certain types of movies are being wiped from public availability. And there's going to be a certain section of the population that I'm not going to be able to connect to here. And I know that I'm particularly passionate about film personally, but I think it's pretty undeniable, if you are not kidding yourself about the history of culture and art, that movies affect culture and vice versa, and they reflect what societies are, they reflect our values, and we can learn from them. They help us communicate and learn about the human condition. They also can be entertaining and make life more interesting and less boring, not just through pure escapism, which I am not bad-mouthing, but through reflection and discovering new things. Film is an art, and these are the things that make art powerful, and if you take away the availability of some art, both the availability to consumers to discover it for themselves and to academics and schools to teach students of art about their influences and techniques and importance, in the pursuit of only preserving and pushing what is most profitable, you wind up with a media landscape and a culture that is very rich, maybe, but is also very emotionally empty. I see a lot of parallels to this with the issue of Nintendo taking down ROM sites that host copies of their older games. Even though that's more of an intellectual property argument than like a byproduct of financial restructuring like the Warner thing is. But the same general things are at risk there. A large number of modern-day game programmers, including for popular mainstream and AAA games, learned how games work and learned how to code by reverse engineering illegal online copies of old games, and partially because playing old games on a computer allows you to more easily figure out how they're built, obviously, and also because the vast majority of these old games don't have releases for newer consoles, and game companies aren't making more of the original consoles. I mean, the actual code from ROM hacks of games has been found in mainstream Nintendo games. And again, I'm not saying that companies wanting money is bad, but at some point these companies are going to have to realize that in a short-sighted attempt to bolster themselves through maximizing their profits, they're crippling their own industries creatively, which is both, it's troubling as someone who's finishing college trying to get into a creative industry and has wanted to work in the industry their whole life, as well as to the people working in it now that don't only operate on what is the most profitable thing possible, but actually have a desire to grow and evolve their art form. And doing shit like this is going to stifle that growth and evolution. And I think that's only going to come back to bite these industries in the ass later on if they let it go on unfettered for much longer. I think that's it. I think that's all I wanted to say. I could go on forever about corporate media conglomeration and how it's going to ruin all content and all that stuff. I'm going to be piggybacking off of a friend's FilmStruck account for the next month to try and get in movies that I know my library doesn't have copies of, or that I know don't have any other good streaming options, or have expensive or no home media releases. Start stocking up on DVDs and Blu-rays, I guess. Gotta make more room on that fucking shelf over there. Alright, yeah, everything sucks balls. I'll see you next time.